Welcome to SoulWhat, a Soultopia production. Every Tuesday, Michelle and Roger Welch take a deep dive into the intriguing and proactive world of metaphysics, a world beyond our human perception. They'll talk to empaths, readers, and other guests from all walks of life to find out what's hiding under the surface, uncover the mysteries of our modern world, and reveal the answers you need to live a happy, healthier life. Now, here's your hosts, Michelle and Roger Welch.
Well, hello. How is everybody doing? How are you doing, Roger? How are you doing, Matt? Checking in?
I'm doing well.
Awesome.
All right. Well,
Very well.
yeah, good. It's good. I'm glad to hear it. It's not that cold here.
No, and I just heard it's supposed to be like 85 degrees for Christmas Day.
Oh, yeah.
Short
That is a
weather.
Texas Christmas. That is a Texas
I've been wearing
Christmas.
long pants for 2 days now. I'm ready for shorts.
I hope that doesn't mean we're in for a February like we had last year with all the ice and everything like that. I can't remember if it was
does.
warm on Christmas Day last year or not. I need to go back and look.
It would probably be tornadoes.
Right, yeah. It'll be
It'd be-
some
it'd
other
be
natural disaster.
Those geostorm, tornadoes, and ice all at the same time.
Hey, we keep it interesting
It'll
around
be
here.
Sharknadoes.
Yeah, Sharknadoes.
Yeah.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Well, speaking of keeping it really interesting around here, we've looked forward to having Katrina Wynne on, and I know a lot of people have looked forward to it, and we had to change the date due to our doing that at one point, and so we are grateful that she agreed to change that date with us and come back on. And Katrina Wynne is
Give us a second chance.
Give us a second chance. Yes, she did. And Katrina Wynne is an internationally known tarot writer, teacher, independent scholar, and tarot consultant, best known for her development of transformative tarot counseling. She holds a Master of Arts in Counseling Psychology from Antioch University, a Bachelor of Arts in Community Studies from the University of California, and an Associate of Arts in Journalism. Her tarot study began in 1971, eventually touching the lives of thousands around the globe with her work. Katrina's writing has inspired tarot and other metaphysical consultants worldwide, published in the Terosophist International magazine. Enrique's book of conversations, and I'm going to say this wrong so she can correct it, Ex-Intent, and she'll have to say that, and her instructive book, An Introduction to Transformative Tarot Counseling. Katrina teaches online and in person with workshops worldwide. Her emphasis is on training students to engage in deep, meaningful, and ethical sessions, enhancing reading skills and creating more compassionate exchanges. As a minister, she created and continues to develop tarot spirituality, where her work often touches upon core existential issues with a loving and compassionate approach. Hello, Katrina. Welcome to SoulWhat.
Oh, what an honor to be here with you two beautiful people. Just love you. Have so much fun with you. I know we've hung out at a few conferences, and we keep up with each other online now these days.
Well,
So it was really a pleasure.
yeah, I love your beautiful background. It's so colorful and so and bright, and I love looking at it, and it just goes with you. I know when we talk and see each other, you're one of the people who you're very, very deep and very, very serious, but yet you just are very light and always have, not a fake smile on your face, but you always greet people warmly, and I really like that about you. So it's good to see you again.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's good to see you.
And you were just talking about how cold or not cold it gets in Dallas. And I don't know how many people know this, but I actually spent a good part of my childhood in Dallas. And I remember it getting down to 40 degrees and having snow for Christmas sometimes. So that's not too unusual for Dallas.
I know, and I remember, I've told Roger this, I remember taking my son Tyler, who's I think he's 30, I don't know, 33 now, I can't remember, 32, and I can't remember how old he's, and so I'm not good with math.
Let's
and
hope
so,
he doesn't see this.
Oh, he will, yeah. He will see it, but he won't care. And I remember it was Halloween, and it was like 17 degrees, and I was like, just run up to the, I'm going to drive you and you just run up to the door. And he was little bitty. I was like, you'll be fine. You'll be fine. You won't slip on the ice. You just run up to the door.
Well, I've lived here 12 years, and I moved here because it's warm. I do not like the cold. I do not like snow. If it's like a day or two is good. Snow for a month is not good. And I moved here, and I was here like 2 weeks, and it snowed like 12 inches. No, what the hell happened here? And then it like
Brought it with you, Roger.
and it just it did it like that year like 3 or 4 times, and I was like, I have made a mistake.
I know, but you didn't. You didn't. Look what all has happened.
I know. I was trying to figure out how to move further south.
Well, you know, you still get to do all the fun things, the warm things.
Yeah.
Texas is great. So all the weather's great, and you like the mountains.
Getting
and stuff.
snow here in a couple of days.
Oh, yeah.
in Oregon. On the coast.
Roger will be there.
I'll come visit you when it's not snowing.
Oh, okay. So we are excited to talk about a lot of things regarding your expertise in so many of these areas that were mentioned in your bio. And first of all, just why don't you just correct me on what I couldn't pronounce? The Enrique's Book of Conversations, and then I couldn't pronounce that. What is that?
I don't have it memorized, but it basically what he's done is taken 2 words but breaking up the syllables a little bit. So it's sort of like exit in and in exit.
Yeah. Okay, I get it. I thought it was maybe something Latin that I didn't know how to say.
No, not really.
Okay.
And what was really cool how that one started is he just reached out to people he'd heard about. We hadn't quite met yet. And he'd start this email conversation with that person around a particular topic. And it would just, the conversation would have its own flow and go in unique and interesting directions purely through email.
Oh.
And then he ended up publishing each one of those interviews on his website. And then that's what ultimately turned into his 2 books.
Oh, that's
pretty
interesting.
cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's
Definitely cool.
that helps.
Yeah.
That would help on this 3rd book, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
I'm working on one right now, and that would help a lot. I'm going to be emailing you. Get right. You get. I could take about maybe 10,000 words. Katrina? No.
Why not? I love doing things like that. I do.
I did think about it on
Even my own book here, the Transformative Tarot Counseling book.
we have it.
Some of the chapters started off as articles I'd written, and then it built up from there because, on my website, tarotcounseling.org, I was exploring what is tarot or transformative tarot counseling or consulting, depending on where you live. Sometimes you call it consulting, sometimes it's counseling. That's a whole nother topic in itself we might get into. But I wanted to look at the magical process and how do we get beyond just scraping the surface of a reading and go, like you said, I like to go deep, right? So how do we go deeper into things that are like the core issues for people and things that they can transform, change, evolve from?
What do you do when you have a client who doesn't want to go deep?
Oh, well, guess what? That's one of the first things I talk about in my book is following the client.
Yeah.
So you follow the client. You don't try to lead them. At least from a counseling point of view, that's one of those counseling skills.
Right.
If you listen to where is going on, you may hear more than what they want to look at. And what I usually teach my students is, you never want to push anything, but sometimes you want to nudge them and then see what kind of feedback you get. And again, not a substitute for counseling, but sometimes the reading wants to take somebody into a really deep self-reflective place.
I always say around Soultopia that readings are healings. I think every conversation we have with anyone in some way could serve as a form of healing because you're working it could be a mirror of yourself, whatever it is. I mean, so you're always doing work whether you realize it or not. Yeah. That's kind of a bummer. But you really are. So readings are healings in a way, potentially, maybe always, I don't know.
But in essence, what's so healing about them is someone is being listened to, someone is being cared about. A lot of the things that people like Virginia Satir and more people-centered counseling skills came from. The moment we give our attention to someone, we're giving them love. Mm-hmm. And if you did nothing else, that can be very healing.
I totally agree with that. And so that's is that I'm going to be kind of blunt here. Is that why counselors sometimes just listen and don't ask questions and don't talk?
Well, you know what, my dear, there's so, just like in tarot, there's different styles. In psychology, there's so many different modalities. And I talk about there's a spectrum, everything from behavioralism to existentialism to transformative kinds of works. So it really depends on which philosophy you align with, what you've been trained in,
Right.
whether you take an additional courses. Like some people study Jungian psychology, but that isn't necessarily something that's typically taught in a program that's geared towards social work or family therapy, couples therapy.
Right. Of course, yes. And I was kind of kidding. I was kind of being cheeky because I saw, I don't know if it was that new Will Ferrell and Paul Rudd show, but The Shrink Next Door or something, but they're just sitting there just staring at each other, and Will Ferrell just stares back and Paul Rudd's just staring and the other one's just staring, and I'm thinking, how long is this staring contest going to, and they both just are seeing how long it'll last, and it's pretty funny. So
that style tends to be more Freudian. Because what people are tapping into, what was so interesting about Freud and then ultimately Jung and Reich is they were looking at the dreaming and the trance states and hypnosis, and what they were studying was mesmerism. So what's fascinating about that is they realize as medical professionals, there's so much more going on in the human being. And a lot of it taps into that mysterious dreaming. And so if a person's absolutely silent, and you're not engaging, let's say, the frontal lobe here in their conscious mind, just like with us tarot readers, it allows more intuitive and more subconscious material to come to the surface. And so that's just a style. A style is if you leave a blank space, then whatever person blurts out with, kind of like an ink blot, is going to have some symbolic significance. And actually, in some ways, that's the way I work with tarot at times. Like the card itself is a snapshot of a dream.
Interesting. Yeah.
So you've been working with tarot for 50 years now. How did you get started, and how have you kept your excitement about it?
Oh, those are great questions, Roger. So I was living in Houston, and it was my high school days, you might say, like a sophomore in high school. And something in me just was very interested in all things metaphysical. I was interested in palmistry, astrology, tarot, the I Ching. I got a copy of Ralph Metzner's book, and it was called Pathways. Let me see. I can't think of it right now. It's got Pathways to Transformation or something like that. I can't remember what it was called at the moment, but it had a little bit of each in there. And I started off studying all of them. And then at some point in my, I'll say mid-20s, I said, even though I've studied astrology and I really get it, and I'm very in tune with the I Ching and making a daily ritual and a reading around that, I needed to narrow my focus and really get to know one. Because, there's that saying about being, I forget how it goes, but it's something about how you're not the master of something until you really narrow it down to one thing. So I kind of narrowed all those interests to one thing, that became tarot. And what was so beautiful about that, Roger, is the more I studied tarot, the more I realized it was connected to all those other things, such as astrology. So it was like a pathway into something bigger. And I love that. And so the excitement is that it really is so big. It touches like a template, so many things in life. The tarot has been my friend. So even if I wasn't teaching or I wasn't reading, just studying the tarot is very enriches my life. That's all I'm going to say. And I mean, there's so much more to it I can even begin to tell people. It's magical, it's energy. I've never thought of it as a fortune telling device, even though I know it can be very effective that way. I see it as a spiritual teacher and friend, just like somebody would pick up a Quran or a Bible and read that life wisdom. That's the way I relate to the cards and the tarot. It's like there's thousands and thousands of years of wisdom that's been imbued into the cards and evolved over time as we have evolved. And I never get tired of learning from it. I really don't.
Right. Do you think that because of those years of use of tarot and the tarot, that it's become part of like that collective, and I don't know if you would call that the unconscious or consciousness, what that, part of that collective thought, that I guess it is called, Jungian philosophy, the archetypes that have become part of the collective thought. And I'm throwing a lot of words together that I think you are the professional in that area that can put together a little bit more. But because it's just been used so long, that it gives it even more of a magical sense to it. Do you agree with that?
Boy, I do, but I would kind of break it down a little differently. I'd say that human beings have always been magical, right?
Mm-hmm.
And at some point we split off from our magical associations. We became more intellectual, cognitive kind of thing. And the interesting thing is, just around the same time as electricity was being discovered and harnessed, was around the same time that Freud and Jung and Reich and all these other people got inspired by the idea of electricity and how actually our own minds and our own energy may be following electricity.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I liken that to also the evolution of the tarot, and how the tarot itself was seen maybe as divination and practical, trying to figure out what the weather was going to be like, so we'd know if we could plant those crops, etc., if it was an agrarian society, or just whether it was a good omen or a bad omen, or,
Mm-hmm.
It was a guidance. It was always a way of, I actually have an article about this, about divination. It was always a way of connecting with the divine and getting some kind of information. But just like the human mind kind of split off from the magical, well, the tarot then, it was a way of bringing us back into the magical. And I think the doorway had, in terms of popularity, had two big, I would really narrow it down to two big moments. One moment is the moment that paper was finally reached, from China all the way over to Europe, and they could actually print affordable cards so the average person could have a copy of the cards.
Right.
That's why the Marseille is so popular. That's why we say tarot instead of those of us in Texas who just say tarot, right?
I don't say
Well,
tarot, but I do say it funky.
It's all right, because the Italians would say tarocchi.
Yeah.
And the Germans would be tarot.
Yeah.
So, it just depends on where you live in the world.
Right.
So, but anyway, so what happened is that they became this revival, this interest in our subconscious or unconscious and our spiritual nature. And so then more and more people started seeing the tarot as a resource for tapping into that. So I really do believe there's this beautiful parallel and weaving between understanding electricity and now, and I love your book for this, really remembering that we're electrical, we're vibration, we are energy, you see? And so the tarot in its own way is trying to remind us about that.
Yeah.
And then we're on this journey, and as more and more people wake up to that, I think more and more people get interested in having tools such as tarot. I can't tell you how many people have come to me to study who are like retired judges and attorneys and people who have been in, peace officers and the justice profession, who said, I had to spend all this time in the left side of my brain, and I'm ready to invite the right side in, to have more balance.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because I was just reading writing my third book. I was just reading about the right side and the left side of the brain and how they work together and all that. And I'm not going to get in deep into that in my book because it's a beginner's playbook of sorts for what I do on my Thursday night classes. I called it psychic senses, then it was intuitive insights, then it was something 101, and now it's what is it now? It's the I can't remember what it's called now. It's every Thursday night.
Intuitive Insights.
Intuitive Insights is what it's called now. And so it's interesting because that's exactly what I was writing about last night. And I thought, I need to talk to somebody else. So you actually might get an email about that because it was interesting. Because I really do believe both when we're looking at studying or reading the cards, I do believe in using both sides of our brain. They work together. They work in harmony anyway. So for somebody to say that you're going to shut off one side of your brain, they work together in harmony anyway. So you really can't, no mind one side of your brain. It doesn't work that way. And so and you don't want it to really.
It's like playing ping pong. They just bounce ideas back and forth.
Well, no, but it does work in harmony. And it's been a
That
long
dual,
time since I've studied that, a long, long time, but I did study it. But yeah,
it goes back to dualism, and we really are
mm-hmm.
designed to find a way to bring division and divisiveness or duality into oneness, into unity,
Mm-hmm.
into non-dualism. And that's also what the Tarot teaches us. And so just like what you're talking about, the cognitive, analytical mind, the intuitive, creative mind, they also want to have a beautiful balance, right?
Yeah.
So I love that you're writing that book.
Yeah, and it's interesting because the one thing that people would bring up in readings that would used to make my eyes glaze over was they would start talking about balance, and then I realized it's because that's what I really needed to hear. But I'd be like, they're talking about balance again. What does that really mean? What do they really mean by balance? And they go, well, this card, it looks like you need more balance in your life, and I'm like, well. Okay, bye. That was years ago. I'd be like, okay, boring, next. Give me something interesting. And then I
Something you can
realized,
use.
oh, no, I really do because I work. I love work. I mean, I just don't, I like to work. And my work, even when it's enjoyable, I find a way to make it, really work. And so they are always saying, you're overworked, you do too much. And I'm like, but that's what I need. And they're always like, balance. And aren't you, Roger? You know what I'm talking about.
Yes.
Yeah. So,
Betty.
yeah, it's interesting because now I know that word. Sometimes the things you don't want to hear or you think someone's being silly when they give you a reading, that's probably the very thing you need to hear.
Right. It kind of goes back to your question about, do you take people into an area they might be uncomfortable or not ready for?
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes it's enough just to mention it and let them take it the rest of the way, because they'll come back to it if they're ready for it.
Mm-hmm.
And if they're not ready for it, it's okay. It's not your job to make it happen.
Yeah, exactly.
And here's the other thing that happens, and this kind of goes back to a Jung, because you mentioned Jung before, Carl Jung, Swiss analyst. I like the way he wrote about the 4 functions of thinking. And what it reminds me in the tarot world is that there's people who automatically gravitate to tarot because it's an intuitive art, because they themselves are very intuitive. Mm-hmm. But then there's also the thinking people and the analytical people, the people who use judgment, and judgment meaning discernment, analyzing, things like that. And that it also has a usefulness for them. You see, so depending on what our thinking style is, our bias, the lens that we see life through, that's usually our doorway into the tarot, and then it meets us where we are. It's just, I love the way Eleanor Greenberg, who's a wonderful, I think she's a psychologist, she's in New York, and she likened the tarot to like a Swiss Army knife. And so there's like different tools for different people and different ways of using it.
Right. I agree with that totally. And and that's why I think it doesn't have to be, it's interesting on to watch. I don't hop on a lot of the groups on Facebook anymore because, people argue about the silliest things instead of just trying to discuss, they argue. And I believe in discussion. I like healthy discussions. I learned that way. Like I'm a lawyer, so I'm a lawyer, and then I went to theology school, and that's how you learn. You discuss things, and so I like to discuss it. I'm not saying I don't ever argue. I couldn't say that.
You're a pot stirrer.
I'm not a pot stirrer. No, not anymore. I don't want to be. Not these days.
Stir that pot.
Not these days.
Take that spoon and
you don't
smack
have
it on the side.
Are you saying she's a catalyst for change?
Hell yeah.
I'm a woman who actually speaks up. No, but some of those groups, as you know, they just get toxic, and of course probably the reason they bother me is I want to get right in the middle of it and say, well, what about this, and what about this, and what about this? But I was trained. My training was in the Socratic method at law school, and my training was to stand up and speak, and then to defend, and to go back and forth, and then you walk away from that, and you're still friends. You're not hating each other, even though Socrates had got in arguments with people he didn't agree with, quite frankly. But that's how I was trained. And so I bring that into pretty much everything I do, because you just pretty much have that drilled into you in law school, is to,
My way is much more fun.
what's your way, baby?
You dumb mother.
Oh, Roger.
And my way tends to be, as much as I can, relaxing around judgment. Notice if I have it. If I have a belief, realize it's my belief and other people may not share it, but be interested in other people's beliefs, and eventually be ready to dissolve and allow the beliefs that are not useful to fade away, and try to be more open in my heart, more open in my mind. And again, the tarot is a wonderful teacher of that, I find. I mean, when you get into those last 7 cards, the major arcana, they're in this amazing journey about leaving the ego, or as Dr. Sue Morter and her energy codes would call, the protective personality. Realize it's there trying to protect me. It's going to create walls around me, and it's going to try to control my experiences so that I am not harmed. But what it's doing is it's keeping in the same old rut with the same old experiences, and it doesn't allow me to open up my energy, my heart center, my energy, sort of like my auras, if you want to think about it in our metaphysical ways, and to interact and be more present with life.
Yeah.
If you're in fear, and this kind of goes back to A Course in Miracles, maybe you've come across this, you can be in fear or you can be with love. And that's always that interesting choice.
Right.
And I find that tarot can also reinforce that lesson.
So I think that, and I have pretty much from my book, it sounds like you've read it, it's the same thing. I choose to try to connect with people. I choose to not pass judgment. I like to listen to people's opinions and not try as much as possible to not pass judgment on them. I think it's hard. I think everyone at some point passes judgment, even if they think they don't. There's a bit of passing judgment that we go through, that we at least filter through, because we have a filter that we put things through.
It's probably the best way. I mean,
probably.
You're going to prejudge or judge people and things like that. You just got to do it, but then then move beyond that to the next step of, how do I make this better?
Well, and potentially, and maybe not everyone does, but I think we do have filters of our own thinking that we filter things through. But I wanted to go back to go back to something you said, that the last 8 cards, I believe. Didn't you say the last 8 cards?
The last 7 cards, which by the way includes judgment, the judgment card, which is number 20,
right? Which
is really a teacher about transcending judgment and being non-dualistic.
Well, it was interesting because I took you said the last 7, and this is a little bit different twist, but I took a class on Zoom and I'll give credit to, it's Morbid Anatomy, this website, and I had never really seen it. And Rachel Pollack was teaching a class last Sunday. It was sold out, and it was about death. And she said, she was talking about the last 8 cards, and they're the cards that come after death. And she was taking death as, we say it's a transition, but she was talking of death as, well, I won't go into the whole class, but she said just as, and actually this was just a caveat at the beginning of the class. It was just like a little side thing she mentioned. But those last 8 cards being, in the Buddhist tradition, what happens after death. And it was very interesting, her walking through that. And
like the Bardos?
That Bardos, yes. It was very, very interesting walking through that. And then you bringing that up today, the last 7, and the transformation. So that's the synchronicity of that's great, because and just with a matter of a couple days, a week, I've heard of that brought up twice. So something to hear and interest. Let's talk a little bit about your style, your transformative approach to teaching. And I'm trying to look at your instructive book, An Introduction to Transformative Tarot Counseling, which we have, and I have, by the way. It's actually there's a stack on the side of my bed, and it's in that stack. That's why I don't have it right here. And let's talk a little bit about that, Katrina, and tell us about that book, how people can get it, but also your style in general. I know we've talked a little bit about it already, but just go ahead and tell us a little bit more about it.
Well, it just came to me a little over 10 years ago that I needed to find a way to verbalize my style. Excuse me. I'm going to have a little piece of tea.
Oh, it's okay.
I swallowed something the other day when I was in the garden. I don't know what it is, but it's in my throat sometimes. So I wanted to find a way to verbalize my style, and what probably would have been a book this thick and would have taken me years to write. I gave myself permission to write an introduction to make it a much smaller, more concise book. And what I wanted to do is talk about the steps in a reading that take it beyond just the surface, like I mentioned before, which might be associated with fortune telling, into a more transformative experience for the client, where they come through discovering something new about themselves. And that isn't necessarily counseling, but is something that we do in counseling, especially Jungian style or psychotherapeutic styles of counseling. And so one thing I talked about is one of my very favorite books, which is a little, I think it's the collection of 4 different papers from Israel Regardie, who, worked with the Golden Dawn. And he had gotten very excited about Jung. And so he had already made this connection between magic and alchemy, which Jung had been writing about, and how alchemy itself was a transformative process.
Right.
And so what I did in this book is then bring it back down to a tarot reading, and how that same magical transformative process in its 4 stages is part of a reading. Of course, that was influenced by my 30 years, at that point, 20 years of studying process work psychology with Doctors Arnold and Amy Mendel. But then for me, it was also important to put in things like, well, what are counseling skills? So I have a chapter on counseling skills.
Okay.
And then I also wanted to talk about, which something not too many tarot teachers were talking about those days, is ethics and responsibilities. I know this is something close to your heart, because there's charlatans, or there's people who pick up a deck and they just think they can start reading, and they don't realize they're dealing with people's psyches, right? And their deep wounds, perhaps, or their traumas. And, what do you do when something gets stirred up? Or if you're giving somebody instructions, I talk it right from the beginning. I talk about how sometimes it can be, I'll just be really straight ahead about this. I know you like straight ahead, Michelle. It can be, in my book, unethical to tell somebody what to do with their life. And sometimes a tarot reading comes across like you're telling somebody what to do with their life, as opposed to them discovering for themselves what has meaning, what is a direction, where do they want to put their energy, where they want to put their focus. And of course, the cards can stimulate that conversation, but the cards themselves are not meant to control you, basically. They're not here to control you. They're not here. The reader's not responsible for your destiny. The cards are not responsible for the destiny. You are. They're just tools to help reflect back on that. So those are some of the things I talk about in the book, very simply, very lovingly. And then when I teach my course, which is this one here, Professional Tarot Consulting Certificate course, I actually take my students through a lot of the same things that are in the book, but actually beyond the book. Like, we focus on intuitive skills first, reading, how to work with a spread and bring those intuitive skills in. But then we go into counseling skills and ethics and business skills. And then we start talking about metaphysical things like astrology and tarot, Kabbalah and alchemy and tarot, so that people understand that when you have this deck of cards, if you want to call them, but this amazing magical tool in your hands, that it can go anywhere it needs to go. I also talk about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, that pyramid. I don't talk about it in the book, but with my students, in articles I've written, and how from my point of view, if you're familiar with that pyramid, the first one is just, hey, my needs for food and shelter being met, I'm surviving. And there's 5 layers. And that second layer, you're going up, it gets a little bit more narrow. It's like, well, I have a meaningful work, and I have a nice family, and I like my home, and, I enjoy my life, and month to month, I can survive quite comfortably. And then the next one actually is more on the emotional realm. It's like meaningful emotions and connections with people, and that I feel comfortable in my own skin, emotionally, etc. And then the second to the last one is actually the mind, and that my mind is bright and I can use my mind and I can connect and study and learn. And I realize that my mind is what shapes the way I see life, right? And then the very, very top is actually spiritual. It's like this little pyramid at the top. And so I said the bread and butter for most tarot readers, especially if you're doing fortune telling, is that second layer, because that's where a lot of people's fears are. That's where people come in and go, well, am I going to get that job? Am I going to get that relationship? Or is that person going to leave me? Or they're coming back? Bread and butter. That's why it's closer to the bottom of the pyramid, because a lot more people living there and needing and wanting those things. But my suggestion is even though a client might come in looking for that kind of answer in a reading, why not also see if the reading is going to invite them into those other layers? Maybe it will have a spiritual aspect. Maybe it will have an aspect that really relates to their intellect and their intelligence and their brilliance. Maybe it'll talk about the richness of their own inner love for themselves and self-esteem. And so I want to allow all of the layers of that pyramid to be available in a reading, which means the client's probably going to work a little harder than just sitting down to be fed information.
Right.
And they're going to be interacting in the reading. So that's what I teach in my courses, is how to interact more with the cards and with the client. And so it's kind of like you've got the three of you there, the client, yourself, the cards. But if you want to say, there's also, for some people, another dimension, which you might call the spiritual dimension or energy or quantum field, whatever you'd like to call it.
Right.
And those are some of the other recorded classes I have through Global Spiritual Studies. So for people who want more advanced classes, then I talk about sexual symbolism and meaning in the tarot, and I talk about psychological challenges and the major trumps and tarot magic and transformation. So that's, some people write books. I create webinars with videos and PowerPoints and exercises, and I love that. For me, it's much more interactive.
Well, and a lot of people probably prefer that. A lot of people, don't want to sit down and read a book. I mean, there's a lot of people who don't want to do that and don't and prefer to listen, and for various reasons. So I think that's great.
Yeah.
And I think that's great to have
So
that
it's like
option.
Passive, there's the passive part of it, and then there's the active, which kind of goes back to that balance again. How much I like to see a beautiful balance and like a flow. And of course, I'm a Taoist, among other things, and the I Ching has taught me much about this. And can there be more of a flow in the reading, or is it going to be one-sided, where there's a speaker and a listener?
Very interesting.
And you said you were talking about like ethics and things like that, and so because I've seen people come in here, buy a deck of cards, and then 2 days later you'll see a post on Facebook, I'm a tarot reader, if you want to schedule an appointment with me. It's like, you literally just bought your first deck of cards 2 days ago.
Well, you haven't seen them from here, have you?
No.
But
Just somebody
in
coming
general,
in
yeah.
general. They come in, not people that work here. No, people that
not here.
No, people
Let's
coming
make that
as
really
shopping.
clear.
Shopper people. But no, because some states, they do have different laws about it. Texas is one of those, it's kind of open. But we do ethics training here, once a month. We do, training with our different readers and healers and do ethics. And you were talking about the ethics side of things. What do you think about, do you think it might ever be like a broad spectrum type ethics training classes or ethics policing of the readers or anything? And I kind of use that word policing.
Jump on. They call it gatekeeping.
Yeah.
A lot of them don't want to be gatekeeping. So how do you feel?
So there's like two questions at least there.
Yeah.
The question is, how important are ethics? And also looking at people's level of experience and then interacting with the public, especially if they're collecting money. Another part is, what are the local laws, ordinances, statutes on a statewide level, a county level, a city level? These are the things I actually train my students to look into. That's part of the counseling and ethics class. And also in my book, I recommend that you find out what all those things are. For instance, I was doing some research recently about North Carolina and found out that basically tarot reading was absolutely illegal until 2004. And there was a great effort made to change their laws. So you just don't know until you start looking into it. I love looking things up online and finding out what the laws are, what the rules are. So wherever you're going to be practicing any of these things, you want to know, how do they define the word counselor? How do they define the word consultant? How do they define the word coach? Even what you call yourself. There's a lot of important legal specific legal language that determines what you can or cannot do, whether you have a license or not. When I moved to Oregon, basically, even though I had a graduate degree in counseling and psychology, I wasn't required to have a license here. And so that's the other thing. Maybe you live in a state where you're not required to have a license, but you can still call yourself a counselor. So you really want to understand what the laws are, what the rules are. And as I teach my students, work within your scope of practice. So for instance, I have students who are medical professionals. So of course they can bring in medical details in their readings, but then the rest of the students understand, no, that's out of my scope of practice, but I'm going to have a referral list so I can send those clients out to people who can really support them in that area where they need that.
Right.
So you're asking whether we should have a governing body to do the policing. And that's a huge question itself. It's like the government's already doing that in one way. So the question is should we do it among ourselves? Sometimes people think that there should be a certification process where people are basically given a seal of approval. Even in the state of Oregon, they've tried to do some things like that. But what I look at, honestly, is who is actually qualified enough to make those determinations and what are they basing those decisions on? I'm very, very concerned about that.
I agree with you.
Yeah, that makes sense.
We, because people are reading here, the ethics that we teach so far, it's just to the people who read here. I call it continuing education. To be a lawyer, you have to have continuing education, and every year you have to pay and to have. Now the workers here don't have to pay to have it, but they do have to go and get their continuing education here, and they actually have to have more hours at Soultopia than I do to have to keep my license as an attorney in the state of Texas. So we take it very seriously. Now, as far as I agree with you, who would be that determining body? The interesting thing as an attorney is I'm always sitting there going, this is not what I agree with. I'm just saying this is what probably ultimately would happen. Eventually, the government gets involved when? They get involved when there's money at stake. Now, they're going to start noticing all over the country that that tarot readings have gone up exponentially. It's all in the news. So that's when the government gets involved because they want a little bit of that, and so they can get a licensing fee of some sort. And the governing body is going to be somebody who doesn't know what they're doing, and you're going to get a little sheet of paper that says you can do it, and they're going to get money for it. At some point, I, as an attorney, I would predict that would potentially happen if somebody saw, hey, I can in my county say that you have to have that, and you pay so much money to have it. Yeah.
Right. And there's two other doorways at least. One of them is if somebody were to file a complaint, a lot of people feel more security if there's a licensing board, because then they can take your license away if indeed there was a complaint. But the other side of it is sometimes the people complaining, and this is what I've noticed here in Oregon anyway, is more coming from a scarcity consciousness where somebody says, well, I went to all the trouble to be licensed, and now these life coaches are taking my business away.
Yeah.
And so then they try to change the rules and the guidelines to match and kind of even the playing field from their point of view.
Yeah, it's kind of a big mess. And just because you have continuing education or have a license as an attorney, or just like any field, it doesn't mean you're good at it, just because you went through all that. But the biggest thing is civil litigation that can keep people from being really, really, really bad readers because it's fraud. Fraud would be the cause of action, and
it's already there.
Yeah,
it's already in the books.
Yeah, it's already on the books. It's already there, so that you don't have to do anything because fraud is the cause of action you would use. It would be probably civil fraud. It might climb to the level of criminal fraud in some cases, and so it's already there. Because we absolutely don't allow people to say that, we'll take a curse off of them or any of that kind of stuff. And because that is, in all the cases that I've read, I think without fail, I'm sure there's others, but that's what they're about. The underlying issue there is, and we're being very honest here. I talked about this when I was at Northwest Tourist. The panel that we had talked about this, and it was interesting, the laws. I looked up some too. Canada, you couldn't be a witch, and I think it's still on the books in Canada that you can't be a witch.
Actually, it came off of the books in Canada about 5 or 6 years ago.
Yeah.
And then this friend of mine started this thing in Toronto called Witch Fest North to celebrate that. And it was fun because I got to be part of that for about 2 or 3 years.
Isn't that interesting? Yeah. So, I want to ask first. So, where do you see tarot, the community of tarot, going with all the TikTok readers and all the social media? What do you see with the future of tarot as a business for people to get into? And that's a broad question, but just whatever comes to mind.
Okay. I'm going to answer that in more than one way, if you don't mind.
That's fine.
So, first off, just to tell you where I live in the middle of the woods, no cellular service. My internet comes through the phone line. and this is how remote it is. It's like an hour before this podcast, I had to run up the hill. I had to change clothes, put my dirty clothes on, go up the hill, fix my water system, and come back down in time to get all dolled up again, right? So just to let you know, the people who are most attracted to things like TikTok and anything that's online and electrical, keep in mind they're only going to be around as long as there's electricity and cellular service and people can afford the devices. All right. So because we're talking about the future. So this could be a phase. Now, I think it's a really cool phase. I think it's really cool that people can connect all over the world. I know a lot of my students, I encourage they get together with other people and practice readings. But in terms of people charging money, think of it this way. And it's interesting. I was just listening to this guy named Lee Harris today doing his annual beautiful solstice. And by the way, it's the solstice, and I want to wish a happy solstice to everyone, whether it's summer or winter for you. And it's a blessed time.
Yes.
But what he was mentioning, and this is the way I heard it, is that whenever there's, I'm going to use the word greed. When there's greed, when there's people not being their most excellent self, people not giving service from a heart or a sincere place or a balanced place, that happens all across the board. It happens with people who come to do repairs in your office. It happens with people who work on your house. It works with people. It's not the tool, it's the people. The people can be stingy. The people can be greedy. The people can be unethical. And so the question is if we can bring more ethics and more caring into the work. I think it's people like you and the two of you and the people that you work with who are raising the bar and modeling that for others. So hopefully other people will want to meet you there and match that energy. That's always, I think, the challenge. And that kind of goes back to why I love this as a spiritual podcast, because what we do is think of that pyramid again, Maslow's. If we can raise ourselves up to embrace all the layers of that pyramid, then we can bring the brothers and sisters and the in-betweens with us.
Right.
And so that's my vision for the future, and I'm sticking to it.
I appreciate that. I appreciate that a lot. I want to mention some of your, just so we, you mentioned your recordings and you showed us some of the list of the online classes. You have over 20 recorded online classes that are available for people to sign up, I'm assuming, for. And
actually, they're recorded. They're already recorded,
Yeah,
and people can watch some. Some of them are free, so you can watch them. Some of them have a very minimum fee. We're talking like $22 or something.
Okay.
Really, really deep topics covered, very detailed, and you get to download it and just keep it for yourself. So that's what it's like having a book, really. You get to download it, study it, repeat it, do the exercises. Yeah.
There are several places you mention for people to get a hold of you. What is the very, very best place, one or two, for them to find out what you offer, because you've been doing this for 50 years. So, you have a lot of things to offer. So what's the
Well, I
best
started
place?
off as a solitary practitioner for the first 20 years.
So-
And until I moved to this little remote area on the Oregon
Yeah.
coast, I wasn't doing readings for other people, very, very little teaching. And then people started asking me to teach and started asking me to do readings. And so it's kind of weird. It was a very interesting flip there. So the best place to reach me would be through my phone number or
Okay.
my email or my website. Tarotcounseling.org is the website. I don't know if this is very legible
Yeah,
there.
we can see it.
All right. And the email is mail@tarotcounseling.org. So it's my website plus mail at. And then I'm, of course, here in the US. So it's a 1+. And then Oregon is 541. And then 547-5123. Another fun way to connect with me is through something I started this year. I woke up one morning and Creator said, I want you to start a meetup group. So for live classes and also for guest mentors and teachers, which, by the way, Michelle, I was going to ask you if you might like to be one of those teachers in 2022,
Yeah, let's talk about it.
global meetup circle. So if you go up to the meetup, we do all of our classes online, which I love. And those are live. Those are not recorded. And then I also do supervisions. I do a quarterly free meet and greet. We just had one a couple of days ago. And it's a wonderful way of networking with our Tarot community around the world. So yeah, Global Meetup Circle, which is on meetup.com. And I want to say one more thing. This is the first time I'm offering, I do really deep rituals, and I'm doing one on the 30th through that meetup circle. And it's a 3-hour ritual where we're going through the 10 dimensions. It's called Awakening Universal Purpose. And I've offered it live to large groups of people before, but I've never done it online to large groups of people. And this is going to be amazing. It's limited to, right now, I think there's maybe 18 or 17 spots left.
Okay.
That's cool.
That's awesome. Okay, so do we want to do our before we've got about 6 minutes, do our 1, 2, 3. Katrina has graciously agreed to do this. Our readings are usually, just like most of ours, they usually go into a lot more than we do on the air. We just give you a little bitty sampling of something we get, just a little information we get from the card that we pull. And we give, if you would, and you're listening or watching, or you listen later, before we start, just take a moment and set your intention for whatever we, sorry, I didn't hand you that, whatever we receive or whatever, and I'm setting my intention for this to be for the highest and best good, and we'll all set our intentions. And if you would set your intention, if you're listening or watching, that you pick 1, 2, or 3, and we have a joke around here, Katrina. One of our readers and favorite people that work here, he's just a sweetheart. He always says, "Now, no cheating, y'all," because he says you pick a number and no changing. So 1, 2, or 3, and I will tell you who's going to read for you in a second. But set your intention, 1, 2, or 3, whichever one is going to be your reading for this coming week. Which this is going to be an interesting week, at least for us, right? We have guests and all that kind of stuff. We have guests, and then we had guests that couldn't come in town. My son couldn't come in from New York because of all the pandemic stuff, and then my little grandbaby, I can't see him for Christmas, so it's all changed. It's all but it's all good. It all works out, right? It'll work out. So let's have Katrina go first with reading number 1, and you can keep it just to like 1 minute, Katrina. 1 minute or 2 minutes.
And I noticed while I was selecting the card, it might actually be for 2022.
Awesome. That'd be great.
All right. I haven't looked at it yet. My style is not to look at the card and then just turn it over. So, and I haven't done this with you before, so I'm just going to say whatever comes up when I pull the card, right?
Yeah, just a 1 or 2 minute and you said yours is going to be for 2022.
Okay. So I see grace. I see really appreciating the blessings we have in our lives, the attitude of gratitude and just being content. within ourselves, meaning self-sufficiency, self-esteem. And now I'll show you the card and I'll show you what deck it's from.
Pretty. That's really pretty.
And this is from Carol Hertzer. And it's her version of a weight deck, you might say. It's
I love
the
that.
starlight illuminated.
Yeah. I love that deck. All right, Roger, you want to go for twos?
Sure.
Thank you, Katrina.
So I got, and I'm using Michelle's tiles here from Light Seers from Jamie.
So
Sawyer.
Jamie Sawyer makes my tiles that I'm rather addicted to. I love them, and I have the Rider-Waite. I have Chris Ann Donnelly's Light Seers, and I have the Pocket of Piers all on tiles. So you're reading the Light Seers, right?
Light Seers.
Okay.
Yep.
By Chris Ann Donnelly.
Well, yes, by Chris Ann. But I've got the Knight of Wands, and this week is actually a lot of us will be celebrating. We'll be with family, friends, and everything. So, looking at this card is also the horse is actually in the background, and the person's in the foreground, right? Mm-hmm. So take this time this week and don't be trying to rush from place to place to place to place. Take where you are. Settle down and enjoy that time where you actually are. Okay.
Okay. I always choose two, so he knows. He knows that one's me.
Oh, you did?
Yeah. I always do choose two. One day I'll shake
It's
it
kind
up.
of like rock, paper, scissors with
Yeah,
you, too.
I know. Oh, what do I always choose in rock, paper, scissors? Scissors. I always think scissors. Somehow, Matt, I think scissors wins.
She's a fanatic. You know she buys.
I mean, it does every now and then, but not always.
I know.
Not when she's gonna pick scissors. You
No.
just pick rock.
Yeah.
I'm just thinking the magical scissors. They win every time. Right? No, it doesn't work.
No.
But
Yeah.
because she's a fanatic about scissors, she literally buys scissors
I do.
every time at the store.
I do scissors, ladders, and extension cords. I love.
Well, you're prepared for something.
I'm prepared for something. I'm not sure what it is, but I am prepared. At least it's not duct tape.
That's what I'm getting her for Christmas.
A lot of. Well, I would
got her
love that.
Box of assorted scissors.
I would love that.
They're the child safety
I'd
ones
be
with the
so
rounded
excited. No.
points.
I want really good scissors. They have to be nice scissors. Okay, so for the number threes, I drew from the crystal card deck that we use at Soultopia, and I drew Apache Tear. And I love Apache Tear. And I love the story behind it. But for the number threes this week, what I'm getting is it's a time of forgiveness. There will be some time, maybe some grief that we have gone through, but it's also a time of forgiveness and looking at things and I actually just want to read. I love the story of it. It stands for the tears of the Native Americans, the women who
Trail of Tears.
the Trail of Tears, the women and children who cried.
Cherokee people.
Yes, and that as they cried so it's good actually for what I wrote. It's good for change. It's good for grief. It's good for forgiveness, which is the word that popped out at me. Was forgiveness for this week, as to just look at that in forgiving, especially ourselves, and stop being so hard on ourselves. There are things that we can forgive and release in ourselves that we've been hard on with ourselves. That's what I'm getting for number threes this week. I did also write on here that it combats self-limiting beliefs and helps us move forward for the Apache Tear. So, thank you so much, Katrina, for being on Us Your Tea. I hope that you get that you have a wonderful holiday season. That the next coming days are good for you, and Matt, same for you. Yeah, thank you for.
Yes, thank you.
I know that I'm catching you off guard every time I turn over and put
No,
you on
it's
the
all right.
microphone. But everyone, we hope you have a wonderful holiday season. Everyone that can be with those that they love, those who can't be, or plans have changed, like my plans have changed. But we are going to make the best of it, right?
Yep.
And have a wonderful time. And I just hope we will, I guess, see you in the new year. Is that right? The next one? We got another one.
We have
Got another one.
Another one.
Another one.
Another one. Okay. And so thank you so much, Katrina Wynne. I look forward to seeing you again, and I know we will soon. And I appreciate your flexibility with us, and I appreciate so much your wisdom. And thank you for coming on. And everyone else, thanks for joining us tonight. We will see you again one more time before the end of the year. Good night, everyone.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks for listening to SoulWhat, a Soultopia production. If you're intrigued, searching, or looking to schedule a reading of your very own, visit us in sunny Dallas, Texas, or visit us online at facebook.com/Soultopia Holistic Boutique. And if you like what you heard, subscribe, rate, and review on your favorite podcasting platform to be the first to hear new episodes every Tuesday at 7:30 Central.